I had a class this week, and we started to talk about the first class in Introduction to Sociology, and we started to talk about the different perspectives in sociology, the conflict perspective, the functional perspective, and the interactionist perspective. And in explaining this, the functionalist perspective, we were talking about how the idea that we look at each institution in society as having functions that could be good for the society, regardless of whether it's good or not, whether the institution is something which we could approve of or not. And as an example, I talked about slavery. And what I said was that there must be something good for the function of society from slavery, otherwise it wouldn't have existed for so many thousands and thousands of years. Well, fine, it seemed to go over fine, and after class, one of the students leaves class and comes back, and he says, you really, really upset me, he says to me. I says, why? He says, because I can't see how you could associate the word good with slavery. So I said to him, you know what? I'm very happy that that was your reaction, because that will show you a very important principle in studying sociology, and something that you can take with you in studying everything from an intellectual point of view. The idea here is something which the great philosopher of sociology, Max Weber, introduced. Well, he didn't introduce it, he introduced a term called value-free sociology. Okay, so that Max Weber was a major sociologist. Some people say he was the greatest sociologist, the greatest theoretician of sociology. He lived he actually passed away in the first part of the 20th century, and he had one of his major concepts was this concept of value-free sociology. And the idea here is that when you study, actually when you study anything, but in his case, when you study sociology, the study of sociology should not be impinged or colored by your own personal, political, philosophical, social perspectives. But rather, you should take a rational, setback, intellectual way of looking at things, which will allow you to dissect and understand and deconstruct all of the factors which go along in that. So he actually, in other words, beforehand, before this time, sociologists, and by the way, this concept is not really 100% accepted universally within sociologists or by psychologists, for that matter. The idea that in order for sociology, or in another case psychology, to be considered a pure science or a true science, it should not be a tool for politics or ethics or something like that. Weber got into a lot of conflict during his life, in his professional life, for telling people, his fellow professors, that their political preferences should not be apparent in their academic work. As a matter of fact, he would say that if you were using your post as a professor to propagate political positions, then you're abusing your position as a professor. Science does not actually say what is good or bad. It defines the reality in the world. And your personal preferences are no better than the next guy's personal, ethical, or political preferences. You can teach your students how sociology works. You can teach your students what are the processes that go on in society. But that doesn't tell you, or doesn't give you the right to tell the students how to vote, for instance. One professor's idea is in politics or ethics, is no better than the next guy's. even a non-professor, a non-scientist. So we can say that, on the other hand, that this is the other side of it. Let's say somebody actually understands the process of sociology or psychology or something like that. That means that he can, to a certain extent, statistically valid even, make a prediction of what will be the result of one particular policy or not. But it won't necessarily actually be true, and it might not necessarily be the ethical outcome. You might not agree with that ethical outcome. And that is the basis. So when you go into the study of sociology, the research should not be influenced by your ethical or philosophical or political positions. Now, it's not to say that though you should be value-free in your life. This is certainly not true. And Weber did not say that your values and your philosophies and your politics should not influence what you're going to study. It certainly will. It's a great idea to study racism if you think that racism has to be studied in order to reduce or abolish racism. But when you go back and study the racism itself, then you need to be aware and understand that there are things from other perspectives which you can only see when you are allow yourself to use lenses which are value-free. Now, the truth of the matter is you cannot in any way. Well, let's go back one more step. Weber died in the 1920s. In other words, he was German, he lived in Germany prior to the rise of Nazism. So, one might say, wouldn't it be better, or maybe Weber would have changed his mind, if he had advocated or the using of sociology to prevent a virulently prejudicial, discriminatory, and deadly philosophy of society, of economics and politics? Well, maybe that would have been true. But when you come right down and look at it, there were just as many scientists who supported and used their science in order to propagate National Socialist philosophy. So, on the objective level, one could not say that one scientific view is better or more ethical than the other. It doesn't flow from the science itself. And since it doesn't flow from the science itself, you can't learn science from that perspective. And as a matter of fact, sometimes science itself, and there's one point in American history, or history of sociology, say that racism was the scientific basis. The Bronx Zoo, the Bronx Zoological Association, was originally a very racist scientific society, believing that the savages from Africa were of a lower level than white people. Now, they had scientific evidence for that. That doesn't mean that it's true. It doesn't mean that it's something you can purport to believe or even think to, or support in any way, shape, manner, or form. And at the same time, there were people who were against this racial philosophy. So, on the other hand, one must realize that everybody has their own prejudices and viewpoints and politics. Being aware of that actually might enhance your ability to gain a foothold in the value-free sociology or value-free research by being aware and counteracting or taking into account that those prejudices and those values which you have. And so Weber was talking about value-free sociology as the goal, as the ideal. And that's something, when we go and start learning sociology, we want to try to take ourselves and put our minds separate from our hearts and our ethics in order to understand all of the perspectives. So you get a perspective from here, a perspective from there. You look at them from both sides, and you get a much better, clearer picture. And if by getting a clearer picture, your values or ethics might change, so be it. But having your perspectives influencing your values is not the same thing as having your values influence your scientific and research procedures. Thank you.